Next on the agenda would be Mr. Ray Civitts, and his presentation will be year-round beekeeping in the upper state of Georgia and South Carolina. Thank you.
Well, good morning. It is good to see everybody that turns out. We were in the Georgia Association meeting in Columbus several months ago. Only 1/3 of this room would have showed up for that. So thank you so much for caring about beekeeping in general. Okay, my presentation comes out of phone calls, text messages, emails, Facebook messages, and all the above. And what I want to do is I'm going to step you through some of the stumbling blocks that new beekeepers as well as experienced beekeepers, and I've heard from folks that have been beekeeping for 20 years go, really? And it's basic 101 beekeeping. I also want to touch base on to help some sideliners. We're managing roughly 100 honey hives, and we'll ship somewhere during bee season somewhere around about 1,500 packages and news. So we keep pretty busy, and it's always a welcome time of the year, this time of year, where we can slow down and enjoy the fellowship with fellow beekeepers. All right, well, let's get started. Here in South Carolina, there's several climatic zones from beach area right up to the mountain region. In all, there's probably about 5 weeks worth of difference between the coastal area and up here in the mountain region. So as I walk through this presentation, we're going to do the 4 seasons and talk about those in general. We won't get into month to month because that will really stir the basket with everybody that might be from the southern part of the state to the northern part. One of the key things that we have to remember when we're picking our initial yard to set up our hives are these really good things. One is, how much sun is your hives going to be getting? You know, this time of the year I start hearing a lot of phone calls. I got these little black things crawling around in my hive, and they're about overtaking. And I say, well, how much sun are you seeing in your hives? And normally it's 3 to 4 hours, maybe 5 hours a day for peak summer. This will help if you get 8 to 9 hours of sun. More sun, the better. This is also a very, very interesting topic here is prevailing winds. You want to make sure that you have ground cover to help buffet those bee yards that you have. If you can pick the best judgment area to put your hives in, and I am a prime example of this. I found a ravine to put my hives in, and we have roughly 40 hives in that yard, and it looked perfect, absolutely perfect, until the first windstorm came through, and it ended up being a wind tunnel. I had tops flying from here to the door over there, and it was absolutely stunning to come over the hill and look down in that ravine to see all these hives disturbed. So we did a workaround. We actually use our stands in the off season that hold our hives and stack them up and reinforce them with concrete blocks. And that has given them the refuge that they needed, and now they are thriving in that yard. One of the other things would be, how easy is it to get to your hives? Some of you may use a wheelbarrow or a cart like what we have here, but you got to have easy access. I know the last thing that I want to do is haul a super of honey 100 yards to my house or to my vehicle to load up. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. The other thing would be good drainage. The better the drainage, the better off your bees will be. And it's safety too. Because if you're going to be pulling those supers off and sloshing around in the mud, you're going to fall, you're going to hurt yourself. So that is a very, very important thing to consider too. Last but not least would be the water source. Your bees need water. And I'm rather fortunate that we have either a stream or a pond or a bird bath. We use a bird bath in one of our smaller yards. And this is what our bees use to cool during the summer. And, of course, during the winter months also. This is one of our commercial yards. I want to just show access. This is where we drive in, and we can pull right up in the front or in the rear of each of these. And it's very, very quick access to load and unload. And in fact, if right in this area over here would have been a pond. And so, voila, we have a very, very good tree cover to the north, and they get full sun. And this would have been in April, this shot would have been taken in. Okay, we just survived summer, and we need to think about how are we going to handle our hives going forward. Because winter can be very, very brutal to our hives if we don't get a good offense this time of the year. And that all comes down to a strong hive population. If we have weak ones this time of the year, it is a good time to think about combining now. I've tried with certain queens that I say, oh, queen, I know you're going to rebound. August goes by. I know you're going to rebound. September goes by. Then January comes, and she's gone, she's dead, whatever. And I could have easily boosted another hive's population by combining. Okay, one of the fun things, well, I shouldn't say fun things, one of the most common things that we hear in January is, Ray, I don't know what happened, but my bees are gone. And my question is to that caller, when was the last time you got into your hive? Well, I think it was when I harvested my honey. And that's not a good answer to have, because these items right here is what's going to tell you how successful your hive is going to be. You're going to be looking for brood production. How good is that queen laying in that hive? Are there queen cells, and where are those queen cells located? Because that's going to tell you, one, either the population is ready to explode and they're ready to swarm, or that queen is beginning to fail. And of course, small hive beetles right now are going to be on the march, and it is important to get in front of those and defend the hive as quickly as possible, because the folks that forget this time of the year, they will not have a thriving hive come January, February. It may survive, but it ain't going to thrive. And beekeeping is about thriving bees. Of course, wax moths are always the last ones to show up for the show. And we all know the mess that they can make. Standing water is another one. You know, are we going to allow water to stand in our apiary? I am very, very concerned. One of the things that I always talk to our folks that work with us and my wife is, what is the bee population? Before we start any conversation about a hive, how many bees are in that hive? And I've got a slide here in a minute. I'll show you one of the telltales that I use when I get into my hive. One of the other things I'm looking at this time of year is what kind of condition is the hive body itself. Are there big cracks? Is it that I have so many supers piled up that the bottom board is cracking? You know, I don't know. There could be a lot of different things there. I'm also looking at water source. Very, very important that my bees always have water available. And of course, weed control. I know some beekeepers keep them a couple inches off the ground. We have chose to keep our hives 2 feet off the ground for more reasons. Okay, calls that we get a lot this time of the year is, Ray, I think my hive's about to swarm. And I said, okay, well, what's going on? Well, it's got like a man's beard, on the front of the hive. And I said, well, that's not swarming. That's like going out on the front porch in the 1900s to cool off during the hot summer day. They're doing the same thing. And they said, you sure? And I said, well, you wait until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock tonight, and they'll all be back in. And sure enough, they call back and they say, hey, you were right. But the next step that we're going to be having, and I'm sure it's done in the beach area, is the nectar flow has decreased significantly. Even in this area, we've seen a significant decline in the nectar flow. We want to also check for mites. August and September are my months that we look at a variety of different treatments to use for our bees. We choose to use organic means, and that's just a preferential way that we use for that. And some of that is using a screen bottom board, and we have been successful with that. As we get into the fall season, there's the transition of bees. Those bees are changing from the smaller type of bee to a lot larger of a bee. And that's when the hive really starts to slow down. One thing that we always want to look at is if we're into a single developing hive body, we're going to want to add a superon so that by feeding them sugar water, they'll have enough food stores to get through December, January, and February. And of course, we want to look at repairing any hives too that might be in disarray. Okay, late fall season. The hives are definitely slowing down. As you can see here, some on the front row, there's a little bit of activity here, and there's only one that has a lot of activity. We are going to break down any of our supers. If we have 2 supers or more, we're going to take one of those 2 off and try to condense the bee population down. And I have a good picture here in a second. I'm going to show you about wintering the bees. As I stated, the brood production is decreasing, and of course, hive beetles are on the offensive. One of the last pollen sources and nectar is goldenrod. How many have a lot of goldenrod around? Man, does it stink? The goldenrod is very, very important. We happen to be fortunate enough to have a 5-acre field that comes in at different stages, and it provides a very good source for the bees to really thrive right up through the first, second week of November. And the last thing that in the late fall season is order your bees. Don't wait to order your bees later because all the good dates get taken up by the end of the year. Okay, going into late fall and early winter is we're reducing these openings to our hives. There's several ways of doing that. We prefer to use about 2 inches is what our opening is on every one of our hives. And it can be consolidated down to the size of a bee. When I know that there is some very significant long-term cold weather coming, especially up here in the mountain region, I will take that down to the size of 1 bee. And they'll winter through that very, very well. Okay, I have not forgotten to get into my hives during this point in time. If I have a day that is 55 degrees or higher, I will be in and out of that hive within 3 to 5 minutes, depending on what I find, and put it back together and on to the next hive. One of the 3 things I'm looking for is the population, the hive condition, have the hive beetles taken their toll, and also the brood pattern. Those brood patterns are going to be very, very important on my quick look in. And during this time of the year, you're going to be looking at a softball size or larger of a pattern for your queen laying on her brood. Now, during non-55 degree weather, let's just say it's 40 degrees, I will do a walkthrough in the bee yard, and if I see bees camping out, half of these, I'm fine with that. If I don't see any bees, that's fine. But I will go back in behind the hive, pick it up slightly, just to see what the weight is and how much honey stores are in that particular hive. Okay, this is a pretty cool picture. My wife took this. This right here, we just got about 3 inches of snow, and that is the cluster of the heat coming up through the inner cover and hitting the top cover, and it melted that snow right down. That is something that I love to look for on a hive, because it tells me, one, that hive is very reactive, and that hive is being very productive in their heat. So those are some good telltales of just spending 2-3 minutes walking through a bee yard. Yes?
Real quick, you said you use screen bottoms during the winter. Do you also close off the screen bottom?
I do have screen bottom boards, and they are closed year-round. Now, what I do is I take them out, clean those, and put them back in. I wish I was more efficient on doing them on a monthly basis, but I found that leaving it in there year-round, especially during the winter, I might even take duct tape and close up any little gaps that might be there on a screen bottom board, because there will be some gaps. You can put a drip pan in there. I've heard a lot of good praise about putting a drip pan in there for the hive beetles when they fall in. No, I do not. Unfortunately, my equipment won't accept that for the standard size, and we do run 8 frames in our apiaries. Yes. Okay. You have your screen, and then underneath is a white sticky board that's there. And when you put that white sticky board in, or a corrugated plastic board, that closes it up. So that's what I mean by that. Yes?
What do you do about top ventilation?
Top ventilation is very good. Let's see here. Well, that one is sealed up. I basically go to my inner cover and have a notch on the front. And I leave that exposed year-round except when long frigid temperatures come. And then I'll slide that telescopic cover back and close it up. Yes, ma'am.
Do you ever insulate the hive with anything if it's going to be really, really cold? Do you ever have ice from nails or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The question was, do we insulate our hives? We do not insulate our hives, and I live to regret that this past year. We had roughly a week to 10 days of sub-30 at night, and I think a couple of days it might have got to freezing on that, and that did cross my mind. And that was in my wind tunnel yard that I lost quite a few bees, and they froze. And so as you get up into the mountain region, that does become a viable question, is do you insulate or not? There are some products that are out there that you can wrap your hive, and then also something as primitive as putting bales of hay around your hives. Is there any other questions? Okay. Let's get back to the PowerPoint here. All right. The thing that we sometimes lose our focus on is we have this huge colony, and we all have them in our bee yards. We have one that's just thriving. The queen just seems to be overpopulating your hive. So you have not been watching your your hive through December and January because most likely the temperature has been cold. The problem that you're going to run into is they're going to eat through those honey stores, and come mid to late February, they're going to starve at that point. And our phones actually light up like a Christmas tree during this time of the year because folks say, this hive was doing so good. And then we go through these questions, and I said, was there any honey in there? No. And so thus they absconded most likely, or just died off of a slow death. Okay, and once again, just go back to the back part of your hive, pick up the back of it. You don't have to pick it up any more than a half inch, just feel the weight. And last but not least, when it comes to winter, is feeding sugar water. We have tried to use pollen patties, and that has had limited results. I'm not so keen on it, but we're going to give it one more try and do a test run on some hives again this year and see what happens. I've heard of some beekeepers say that they've actually seen the bees come out front and spit it out the front. And so I don't know if that's true or false. I don't have the time to sit out there and watch the hive, but I heard that and I thought that was quite comical. Okay. Some of the things that will benefit you the best is figuring out, what am I going to do with all this honey that I'm making? What am I going to use all this wax that's come in with this honey? And what kind of honey am I going to set my hives out to collect? And how am I going to sell this honey? And the questions keep going and going and going. This is a great time in November, December, even January to determine what route you want to go with your bees. Because this is the time of year to get good buys on various products. And it will take some planning too, whatever you decide to do. This past year, we purchased a full semi of lumber, and we manufactured screen bottom boards, brood boxes. I couldn't remember when I put the slide together how many brood boxes. It was too many. And then 105 medium supers I made with the handles inset, and 250 new boxes this past year. That takes planning. If you're going to expand your apiary, you got to be able to make those plans well in advance. And then I had one guy. All his duty is to put 5,000 frames together. And he would always come in and he'd say, Mr. Ray, what do you want me to do? And I'd point to the bench, and he says, I understand. And he just put frame after frame after frame and foundation in. This past year, to get our company where we wanted it, it took us about 10,000 pounds of sugar just to feed the nukes. So anybody that you buy nukes from, it's well worth the price that you pay. On average, speaking of sugar, if you rob your hive of all the honey, it will take 37 pounds of sugar water to feed that hive to keep it through the off-season. And that's on average 37 pounds. Okay, and this is always a good one here, because I miss this one all the time. How much time is it going to take to do whatever I want to do? So here's the rule of thumb. Figure whatever that is and add 20%. And you'll be pretty close at that point. Cutting all this equipment up, putting it together, and doing it right takes time. And that was the project for this winter for putting together supers. And you'll notice they weren't painted yet either, so that was another couple of days, even with a spray gun. These are new boxes that we made this in the off season. Okay, talked about making sure that you have proper stores of honey for your bees to feed on in the off season. We've also talked about taking those extra mediums that are empty off. And the reason why you want to do that is to help increase the heat efficiency within the hive. If they have too much room, then they got to heat even more space within the hive itself. All right, and then for the first year hives, the option that you'll pretty much have to fall back on is a 2-to-1 sugar-water ratio to feed them in the off season to make sure that they have those proper stores. And, you know, depending on how late in the season you got your bees, you could be looking at 8 months of feeding. This is why we do not sell our bees past the first week of May, because it just does not give enough time for the bees to get enough stores. Did I say hand? Yes.
I was going to ask you, how do you guys winter your honey supers, you know, for the duration of the
Empty ones?
Yeah.
Well, that's always a challenge. What we'll do is we'll just stack them up, and we'll actually put a metal screen on the top to keep whatever out, a real fine screen. And we let open air take care of making sure that there's no mold buildup or anything like that. Okay, this is the bloom that, oh, I'm sorry, yes ma'am. That is correct. This is the bloom that tells me it's time to get really busy. And this is our maple tree out in our yard. The flora begins to bloom and the bees begin to get active. When we go out into the yards this time of the year, we're seeing a lot of activity. And those bees that, you know, during the wintertime, we might see 1 or 2 flying in and out. It's always a welcome sight to walk through the yard and just see hive after hive thriving right now. Once again, 55 degrees or warmer, you want to get into your hive. And this is the time of the year that you really need to be in your hive, we'll just say from March going forward, every 3 weeks, just to monitor what's happening inside the hive body. All right. You may have to keep feeding depending on your stores. And I think the thing that I'm trying to say through this, because I've said feeding, is don't ignore this really important part of beekeeping, is to make sure that your bees are fed. All right. Pollen. Well, first of all, let's look at requeening. There may be some circumstances that present themselves that you need to requeen. And this would be a good time of the year to start figuring out who you're going to buy your queens from. Because you will have queen failures. I mean, that's a given. The productivity could be sliding on your queen, and this is an excellent time to go ahead and requeen. The pollen is coming into the hive, which is stimulating the queen, and your hive should be starting to really roar into full brood production at that point in time. I want to show you a slide here in a minute on bee space, what I look for. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Once again, we're building frames for our supers because we can't store an enormous amount of frames in our facility. Okay. Small hive beetles should not even be hardly present, because if you've taken care of your hive thus far through the year, there might be only a handful running around in the hive during this time of the year. Brood production in the spring should be going strong. You want to be looking for the eggs. When I'm raising nukes, I'm not looking for the queen. I'm looking for egg production. Egg production tells me how productive my queen is. So that should be your first telltale. You know, do I have a lot of eggs that are there in my hive? And the rest kind of falls into place with the larva and the cat brood. But low production of eggs means that hive is in the descent stage right at that point in time. And one thing that is commonly talked about is a not properly mated queen, where the queen did well the first season, and then the second season, the queen began to fail. Are there any questions thus far? All right, we'll keep going. Yes, Phil.
Ray, talk to us about your organic treatment for plants.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll come back to that during the Q&A time. All right. All right. So once again, we're going to continue the weekly inspections. At least on our side, we're going to do weekly to 2 weeks. And we want to make sure that we're in each hive body and making sure that things look good. If not, we're going to take whatever corrective action at that point in time. I do know of some folks that put several supers on at a time. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if you have a remote bee yard that's multiple miles away and you know that you're going on vacation. That's fine with me too. The issue comes into, though, is can the bees defend the hive from the front of the brood box, the entryway? And if that space is correct versus the population, they should do fine on that there. Okay, we've talked about swarming, but swarming, I was out in one of our yards, and I was taking a breather. It had been a long day working in the yard, probably about 8 hours, and there goes a swarm by. And I was like, see ya. And I said, man, that is a big swarm that's heading out. And I said, well, I'm going to run and get it. And so I grabbed the bucket and I went running. They outran me about a mile down the road. And this was a big one. I would say there was at least 500,000 to 600,000 bees in it. And so, yes, it was out in my yard. I watched them go on out. And it was disheartening because here's the way I look at it, is loss of honey production.
Yep.
Because when a swarm happens, they're not coming only from one hive in our yards. They're going to come from many different hives. So, I mean, we had one in a tree that was about 4 foot high by about this big around, and that's a lot of bees.
So it's only 1 queen, but then other workers just take on.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought it always was 1 queen.
And we're going to be trying a new method of artificial swarming next season. And maybe I can report back to you on how we're doing the artificial swarming and how it came through the spring months. But also the loss of bee production. When you have a swarm, they are going to deplete that population down. And also failing queens. This is kind of the last chance that I always say for our yards, because I'm looking at honey production at this point. I can't have good honey production with a failing queen. And we've all seen those failing queens where there's very minimal brood, and they're lethargic at best. And last but not least, it's your last chance to add hives. And as I like to always tell our clients is that, the first week of May is really the last exit to get off on for adding to your bee yard. Okay. Well, for some reason the last slide doesn't work, but questions, Carrie? Okay, Carrie's going to get me all tore up now. Yes, okay, I'll tell you the story real quick. I was out in that bee yard that I showed earlier, and the DNR guy comes up, and I mean, we had at least 12 million bees flying that day. So I come on out with my full outfit on. He cracks his window this much, hey, how you doing? Well, I've had better days. And so he said, where's your bear fence? And our apiary was the size of this room cut in half. And I said, we haven't seen a bear out here in 5 years. Well, you better get one. And I said, well, I'm going to be out of here in 3 weeks out of this yard. You better get one. And he put it in reverse and off he went. And he did roll up his window very quickly between comments to me. And so now, 2.5 weeks later, a bear came. And the bear tore into a couple of hives each night. And he would come out to about where Carrie was, and he would just sit there and watch me work the hives. And I'd go like this, and off he ran back into the woods. I'm into that. So we put a guard, a hunter, in that yard. Then he decided to come to our home yard. And he tore into that. Well, this went on for 5 days. And on the 5th day, the bear was no more. And we're still working through misdemeanor charges. Over that. The solicitor has stated that I think we need to drop these charges since Mr. Civitts, you weren't even there when he was shot, and you were the one that got fined for it. So, and the fine in Georgia is $600 plus court costs. So, I don't know any better thing to say than just tell the story. All right, any other questions? Yes. I'm sorry, mixed what? I don't do it because it's too costly. I just don't put, I'm sorry. The question was, do I put honey in my sugar water during the winter months? Am I correct? And my answer is no, I can't do that on 100 honey hives. The cost is too expensive for us to do that. Yes?
How do you feed commercially? Do you use 55 gallon drums community feed or what?
How do I mix it?
No, how do you feed extra bee hive individually, or do you use community feed with 55 gallon drums?
We do it individually. We actually do a front workman feeder. And I like that because I don't have to go in and open the hive and allow the warmth to go out on the cold January, February months.
Are you running 2 deep drink feeders?
No, single deep, 1 super, medium. Yes?
We were talking about bees today. This time of year, there's not much out there for bees and open your hives and there's this boy over. I thought, well, I need to put a super on there, but there's not, and then I was maybe I should take it off because there's nothing to love. But then you would say, what do you do?
Yeah, okay, the question was, is this time of the year you have very strong hives, and you just harvested your honey, and you have all these extra bees. Well, those bees are about to do a drop-off, and what we do is we just do a cram down at this point because, one, they will out-eat that honey if you keep giving more space. So you're actually in a negative position financially. It's all about economics at that point because the queen will start slowing down with that there because swarming won't be that evident going forward.
So I did
We just keep 1 super on there full of honey. Yes, Mike? Okay. All right. Oh, this can be a thorny one on mite treatments. I have not found the perfect solution to mite treatments. Jennifer Berry over at UGA has stated many times that she's using an oxalic drip, and I know it's not regulated through USDA and other laws that are out there. I'm going to try it. It's oxalic. I believe it's a 2% solution with sugar water, and it's a drizzle over the top bar. And I'm going to do it on a few hives this year and just see how that does for an organic solution to that. Hop guard. If you're going to treat in August or September, be ready for the most ferocious bees that you'll ever experience. One of the cautions that's in the mice print on hop guard is don't use above 90 degrees. Well, they didn't think that the southeast during this time of year is always above 90 degrees, especially in the sun. I have never been stung as bad as using hop guard during August and September. It is very, very, it gets your bees very, all those. All right. But I don't have a perfect solution for that. I wish I did, but I don't. Are there any other questions? Yes.
When you say you go to your hive on a weekly basis, to what extent? You go just look at super by super, you take frame by frame, or to what extent are you opening those hives?
The question is how deep do I go on an inspection of a hive? And that's going to be based on what time of the year. I'm not going to go through, if I've got 4 supers and honey is in a full flow and I see the bees are really going in and out of that hive, I'm not going to mess with that one. But I'm going to look for a hive that has minimal traffic going in and out of the entrance, and they're not developing the supers like the other peers in that yard are doing. So that's going to be a telltale for me to get in there. And when I do, I'm going to look at eggs. First thing I'm going to be looking for is egg production. And then I'll look for the queen after that. Because if I don't find any eggs, that tells me one of 2 things. The queen is done. She has no more eggs to lay. Or 2, she's gone for whatever reason. So at that point, it's most likely going to be a requeening at best. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, and it was a pleasure being here with you.